Welcome, folks. I want to say thanks for putting up with me. This is episode 20. These are all my opinions. I show my sign. I want to say kind of try to focus on theme if you can, because I think that's our best bet. This is the finale. I'll go through the court case after this presentation. I'm going to go over this quick again. This is something I wrote about the Chicago and Milwaukee field offices. Through the long course of time, I reached out to many. I sent about 50-page packets to many. I first called the Milwaukee field office of HUD and explained the situation, and later agreed that some people could go to prison for what has happened in Wisconsin in this case. I've been talking to the Department of Administration, Dave Jenkins. They had removed the relocation expert Jack Sanderson for a second time. The Milwaukee office had looked at the 50-page packet, and in 1 week, Dave Jenkins called me and stated that Milwaukee was making funds available to the city to purchase my building, pay my relocation and all of my damages, and restitution, and pay punitive damages. The Beaver Dam city attorney told me she saw the letter, but the big problem was all the property owners would be treated fairly and equally. So the city told me personally that they are not interested. Milwaukee HUD office was definitely trying to help me, but they were concerned with the fraud or corruption. Just give the city more money. I believe to the full extent the Milwaukee HUD office was engaged in this conspiracy in a layered form of harboring or helping to hide the corruption and the criminals involved clearly in a cover-up. Chicago field office received a copy of my federal report from Sean Donovan State and started the investigation. Maureen Thurman was a lady in charge at the Chicago field office. There was just one lady in charge of all the fraud. And the Chicago HUD office was in a tough position because Antonio Riley, now head of the Chicago field office, was in charge of WIDA at the time of this corruption took place. So I received a call from Maureen Thurman. She stated back she had read all the documents, and every time she read it, it made her cringe. She at first seemed positive. She stated that HUD was going to send an inspection team from the Inspector General to go and investigate the state. I asked her if she wanted more information. She said no. I thought that was strange. At this time, I think HUD started to realize Antonio Riley's involvement. So then I talked to her, and again, she said they were not going to send in an investigation team, that HUD was not going to do anything because of the cost, she claimed. So when I called her, she would not return my calls, so I wrote to Sean Donovan again. I want to say thank you to Sean Donovan. He was the head of HUD in Washington, D.C., because it wouldn't be for him, this would have never happened. And then she called me 2 months later and said she was sorry for not returning my calls. She said he was going to request information from the state, including the relocation plan. The state did not send the relocation plan. She was not happy with their response, so I had a copy of the relocation plan, which I sent to her, and she also wanted documents that proved the assessed values threat, so I did. After that, she wouldn't return my calls again, so I wrote another letter to Sean Donovan, and then 2 months later, she called me back. She then stated she was going to do remote monitoring of the state's HUD funds, where she would go into the state's files and investigate the funding. Months passed by, and she stated that they had come to a decision that HUD agency had ruled in favor of my report. So that's that. And I know I read this before, but you know, Tom Kennedy is a special person. I just want to say, you know, this approximately $500,000 they got for these people didn't come because the city wanted it. The city didn't help. Tom Kennedy is a very special person, and God will have a very special place for him. Okay, this is the press release that came out. Now, this will be the fourth time they received funding for my building. First time was in the TIF plan. The second time was at 3.7. The third time was at 260,000. And this is the fourth time that they actually got money. And 3 times of that, it's flood relief money, and you can't get duplicate funding. But that's one of the issues I have with HUD too here. The Beaver Dam Common Council last night approved another resolution related to the purchase of the former Fountain Inn Tavern. It was learned in February that additional funding is available for not only the Fountain Inn, but for the 11 downtown property owners who were displaced following the floods of 2008. In a press release, the Department of Administration said they agreed to purchase the properties. The owners should have been given the pre-flood value of their property instead of the assessed value. Like I said, it's the law. You have to get an appraisal. U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has ordered the state to determine the market value of the properties before the 2008 floods to ensure owners receive the proper amount. Owners for 10 of the 11 properties reached an agreement with the city years ago, but Fountain and Jay was the lone holdout. Cried foul was the process, saying he and other property owners were owed money, especially for relocation, which I showed you in the relocation plan that they wrote down and received the money. And then the DNR's attorney took care of it. So the resolution approved last night allows the city to act as a conduit in distributing state grant funds to the property owner. Final dollar figure has not been reached. The amount of the grant is $1 million. Any money not used returned to tape. And then Tom Kennedy says, federal law states that the process is not open to negotiation. And it's the complete opposite of that. I mean, Tom, you should be happy. You got your illegal development. You won. I mean, you ruined me. You should be happy. So this is the first page of 3. This is Lisa Marks, Administrator, Department of Administration. They took over from the Department of Commerce, and I really don't have anything to say good about them. Remote monitoring of State of Wisconsin Community Development Block Grant, State Disaster Recovery Program, acquisition and placement on the Uniform Act. And all the Stafford Act laws apply because of the flood. The purpose of this letter is to discuss the results of HUD's remote monitoring of the City of Beaver Dam CBDR grant activity. As you're aware, we received a written complaint from a property owner, business owner in Beaver Dam, Mr. Jay Haft, who believed the Uniform Relocation and Real Property Act implemented by the regulation at 49 CFR 24 applied to the acquisition parcels to assemble a site for public facility improvement project. They received federal funding. The monitoring was performed by Maureen Thurman, HUD's Regional Relocation Special, in conjunction with HUD State of Wisconsin Community Development Staff Director Sonorma Mitchell. After a thorough review of the complaint, the state's answers to the complaint, projected files, and what was read in various newspapers, HUD has determined that the assisted project should have followed the Uniform Act for the acquisition of all parcels acquired for the floodway acquisition of properties in the flood area, as well as attempted acquisition of Mr. Hayes' property and business, which will be discussed in this letter. It is our determination the state of Wisconsin should have overseen, and the city of Beaver Dam required to subpart B of the Uniform Act implemented by Regulation 49. HUD is now directing the state to ensure correct application is made of the Uniform Act to all parcels acquired and be acquired for this site-specific project. HUD determined that voluntary transaction rules and requirements as set forth were not met because it was blackmail. Thus, full and voluntary regulations and process should have been applied. It is further our determination that tenants, which is important, owners and businesses were not provided a level of service and benefit they should have been applied under subpart C, D, E of the Uniform Relocation Act regulations. Okay, this is page 2 of this, like a summary. As a result of this monitoring, we have 2 findings of noncompliance and 2 concerns for the state to respond. We requested the state's Department of Administration make grant funding available to acquire and compensate this last remaining parcel owner as discussed, the Hayes property. This last remaining parcel, 203 Front Street, was in the written redevelopment plan. In the middle of a floodway project site, it should be acquired expeditiously, negating further hardships for Mr. Haft. This acquisition and relocation, we need to clear both findings in this letter. We need to require the state go back and retroactively apply correct acquisition and relocation process, the correct process, which we discussed in more detail in the enclosure. We are able to provide any technical assistance your office and the state's relocation staff may require to resolve findings and address concerns noted in this letter. We thank the state for its continuing cooperation in this matter and look forward to an amicable solution between all parties involved in this event. We understand the state was acting in good faith, which they weren't, because I showed you in the Commerce Department where they had the DNR's attorney took care of it first. Then they kind of say they didn't know they needed one, even though they had, the DNR's attorney take care of it, so they didn't have to do it. But may have gotten some misguidance during the process of applying correct rules and HUD regulations for the project. I went on the radio, I talked to him. It was just, there was no good faith at all. You see, this is where I feel HUD, is protecting them. Please respond to findings of noncompliance no later than 45 days from the date of this letter. If you have any questions regarding this letter, please contact Maureen Thurman. So that's page 2 of the summary. So this here is page 1 on this enclosure. State of Wisconsin Supplemental Disaster Grant Administrating monitoring the City of Beaver Dam acquisition activities. In the month of June 2008, the City of Beaver Dam received an excess of 14 inches of rain, causing damage and flooding in several properties along the Beaver Dam River. It was 23. As a result, mandatory evacuations were performed on the 100-200 block of Front Street. And on June 14, 2008, FEMA formally declared a disaster via the Federal Registry, and the President of the United States declared a disaster in Wisconsin under the authority of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Act. And all the Stafford Act laws go into effect. Shortly thereafter, the state was awarded supplemental HUD CBDG disaster grant funding through the state's Department of Commerce in June 2009. The state awarded Beaver Dam a grant in $3,715,191. Okay, now I showed you how they gave 1.7 of this, and how Tom Kennedy said in the letter to Dick Leinenkugel that he wanted this money for them. And then they wrote down the relocation plan to use for that, which was 2.7. So they took the $700,000, and it appears that they gave it to a developer worth $200 million. As a part of this award, funding was to be used for acquisition of parcels along the river, demolition and relocation, including the cost to prepare a relocation plan for residential business occupants displaced by the flood. Exclusive of the occupant the city allowed to reoccupy after the flood. As a part of the funding, the state agreed to allow for 10 of 11's building damaged by the flood, leaving J. Hale's building out of the plan to acquire federal funds because he refused to sell under the voluntary acquisition program the city had undertaken. Well, it wasn't a voluntary acquisition program for the first part. The second time part, I'm in there. I showed you that. I don't know who made up that lie, but this meeting that they had, I'll show you the people who were on there. In December 2009, a contract was executed between Beaver Dam and the state of Wisconsin for CBDG emergency assistance money. In September 2010, the city was awarded an extra $260,000 to acquire Mr. Help's property. And that's the exact amount that was in the relocation plan for my property. To date, the city has not acquired its last remaining property from the river. Mr. Hafe refused to sell because of belief the city was not applying the Relocation Act correctly. I wish I would have been at this meeting, because I just read in one of my last few episodes how they gave him a verbal agreement to use it for a lift station, this $260,000. You have to, when you apply for a grant, you have to use it for its intended purpose, okay? That's a crime. Well, the Beaver Dam project in question was started under direction of the state's Office of Commerce and now rests with the Department of Administration, and we look to the Department of Administration for assistance and clear up the findings in this letter. The state sent final information based on a letter dated June 4, 2012 from HUD. Formal monitoring entrance conference call was held on September 6th. Maureen Thurman, Regional Director, led the discussion. The exit conference to convey the results of the review were conducted on December 6, 2012. A summary of participants in both meetings have provided the monitoring report. Compliance assessment process. The evaluation was carried out through review of documentation, discussion with HUD staff and the State Department principal staff. By reviewing the complaint from J. Hafe, emails between the City of Beaver Dam, the Department of Natural Resources, newspaper articles obtained by HUD. The areas assessed. During the monitoring review process, HUD evaluated the following areas to determine whether the state's performance meets the CBD disaster grant program requirements. The property execution has to be voluntary sales. Applicability of the Uniform Relocation Act, eligible costs. Relocation assistance. Relocation plan was supposed to be executed. Notices to be delivered. Payments to displaced person. Setting a plan within 30 days. Overall management system. Writing policies and procedures, record keeping, project overseeing, monitors. And the people that were at this meeting, it was kind of interesting. Too bad they didn't have me there, because you just basically have to go by what the state says. Lisa Marks, state of Wisconsin. Gene Storm, state of Wisconsin. Tara Baxter, state of Wisconsin. Mark Williams, and I've dealt with him before. Saroma Mitchell, Community Planning Director, HUD Office. Gary Wera, Community Planning and Development Representative, HUD Office. Maureen Thurman, the relocation. And the same people there were in the exit conference. Okay, this is page 3. HUD's compliance requirements. HUD defines a finding for the CBDG program as a violation of the CBD regulations or related regulatory requirements. Whenever a violation is identified, departmental guidance states that HUD must issue a finding of noncompliance with measures that require corrective actions by the grantee. However, a concern as an identified deficiency may be elevated to level of a finding if the action is continued. Grantees are not required to respond to concerns, although HUD will keep a record of any comments the city submits. The conclusions drawn from this review resulted in 2 findings and 2 concerns. Conclusions of compliance monitoring assessments by the area of review. The acquisition of 11 properties in the floodway. 1 finding was identified in the review of the acquisition. 1 concern was identified in relation to acquisition. Eligibility. The purpose of the review of the eligibility is to determine the City of Beaver Dam, in conjunction with the Department of Natural Resources, carried out acquisition under the Uniform Relocation Act 49 correctly and in compliance with the regulations. First of all, the DNR didn't receive any grants. Well, they were involved with the blackmail. Yeah. Findings. 1 overall acquisition findings of non-compliant was identified in the review of the grant-assisted acquisitions by Beaver Dam, but the finding is extensive and discussed in detail below. Neither the state or the City of Beaver Dam showed a clear understanding of the difference between voluntary sales methods and involuntary sales method under the Uniform Act. As a result, the city did not apply the correct process, denied property owners rights and protections under the act, and did not compensate sellers correctly. Because, like I said, they knew what they were doing. I mean, HUD defines a voluntary sale under the disaster grant project in Beaver Dam as needing to meet specific criteria to be classified as voluntary. The state funding of the Beaver Dam project did not meet the definition of a voluntary, nor does the offer letter reviewed as part of the complaint from Mr. Hayes meet the requirements of the Uniform Relocation Act. To be considered voluntary under the Act, the following must be met. Programs and projects receiving federal financial assistance. Requirements of this subpart apply to any acquisitions of real projects for programs where there's federal financial assistance. Okay, that's that page. We'll move on to page 4. And financial assistance in any part of the project costs except the acquisitions described in paragraphs 1 through 5. The requirements of subpart B do not apply to acquisitions that meet all of the following conditions in paragraph. No specific site or property needs to be required, although the agency may limit its search for alternative sites to a general geographical area. When an agency wishes to purchase more than 1 site within a general geographic area on this basis, all owners must be treated similarly. The property to be acquired is not part of an intended planned or designated project area where substantially all the property owners within the area is to be acquired within the specific limits. And that applies to the relocation plan. I was, in the map. My building was in there. I mean, I was identified as a displaced person. The agency will not acquire the property if negotiations fail to result in an amicable agreement and the owner is so informed in writing. You just can't threaten somebody for 6 years. The agency will inform the owner in writing of what he believes to be the market value of the property. And that's fair market value. That's defined, by an appraisal. condition. A review of project files revealed no documentation that the city and the state ensured sellers were formally and correctly proper disclosures made. Furthermore, we believe that property owners were coerced in selling their property for far less than the market value by nature of the threat. Repeated in emails, news articles, and minutes from meetings, and the owners did not sell. The city, in conjunction with the DNR, would require owners to demolish their structures and pay for it. The city initially offered 65% of assessed value, then offered 100% of assessed value later in the process, which all sellers agreed to accept one. Well, it says right here, if you don't sell your property for 65% of your assessed value, the DNR is going to order your building down. Those are threats, fear, and ultimatums. That's blackmail. That's what it is. They conspired to commit blackmail. And she's admitting it here because they must have went into some meetings. Sellers were not informed in writing, signed receipt, that if they did not wish to sell or negotiations failed to resolve an amicable agreement, the city would not pursue any further action or threaten condemnation. It has been determined that sellers did not receive offers for full market assessed values. Assessed values are lower than market values, and that the sellers were required to sign addendums to the sales contract stating that they, the seller, acknowledged the sale was voluntary, and they would not be entitled to any relocation assistance, even though they wrote it down and got the money, and the seller had to pay normal closing costs, which is incorrect. The addendums to the sales contracts reviewed also showed the city asked the seller to state that neither a seller, a business, or entity occupying the property or will not be in the occupancy prior to closing. Some of these sites did have tenants, residential and business, who did reoccupy after the flood and were on site when these sales contracts were being negotiated. So that's a very important one because they're basically admitting, in proof that they did blackmail the people out of their property. We have confirmed that there were tenants, residential business who were allowed to reoccupy some of these sites, rendering these sales addendums suspect at least. When HUD funds disaster grant assistance to the fullest extent possible, we expect people affected by the flood damaged properties to be provided benefit under the Uniform Act if due. The intent is to do no harm. It was expected that properly carrying out acquisition acquisition of properties in the floodway, the city would have provided better opportunity for replacement sites for both residents and businesses. This did not occur in Beaver Dam. Both acquisition and relocation expenses were sought by Beaver Dam for this project and approved by the state for this project. But relocation was denied residents and businesses, and acquisition did not fit into the definition of voluntary sales. Well, Tom's been telling everybody, the state, Tom Kennedy, the mayor, that these are voluntary sales. Okay, pursuant to 49 CFR, Part 24-101, the city and the subgrantee, the state, as a grantee possible for oversight, failed to follow the voluntary sale method and documentation requirements. The cause is likely a misunderstanding of requirements and funding regarding applicability of stringent acquisition rules and resulting displacement. The state did not understand that this project was definitely site-specific. The city needed to fulfill notification requirements and threat condemnation are evident. Well, it all goes back to the Weichel building. That's all they cared about. That was their goal. The developer was in such a hurry because he had to have the paperwork done. They had no problem doing that on time. But they knew what they were doing. I went on the radio. I talked to them. I mean, it's just, yeah. The effect is that property owners did not get the protection offered by federal law, nor were they compensated sufficiently for the acquisitions under disaster grant assistance, leaving some sellers and business without assistance to reestablish. Well, you'll see that, like 5 years, 6 later, they come back and give you a relocation. So it's like, well, you didn't relocate. Well, if you would have paid me the money, the people the money when you were supposed to, when you got it, okay, they probably could have relocated, but they had no problem ruining their lives. That's what makes this story so bad. Corrective action. Pursuant to 49, HUD advises the state to complete the following steps to remedy this finding. Contact property owners who sold to the city. 11 sites identified on Front Street and Center Street acquired, and the remaining owner of one site within the floodway 2003, Front Street, that's me. Have Property be contacted to inform them of their rights under that, which they never did, because they would never meet with me, these clowns from this OR colon, which I'll show you in a little bit. Tracing methods must be applied when previous owners did not leave a forwarding address, like Ton Anton. City cannot exclude the one property seller from benefits and acquisition, Ton Anton. The city, this one remaining property owner's business is clear in the middle of the assemblage of land in the Beaver Dam River, and the city should not be inhibiting the full flood improvements needed by going around his parcel or filling in the river. We are informing the state the process of acquiring the 1011 parcel was not appropriately done under a volunteer program because it was blackmail, thus rendering all parcels under the threat of condemnation and subject to the Uniform Act procedures. Once the property owners are found, the following step must be taken. Have the parties appraised by a third-party appraisal, not the state or the city. Now, the city did the appraisal on my building. Yeah. And the invite seller to accompany the appraiser. Value of the property should be set at market value when the properties were sold. So it's just another example how they gave them this. And I talked to Mark Williams later, and he says, HUD doesn't care. They don't care. They came out with this, they're going to wash their hands and just walk away. Properties were sold in 2008. Appraisal must meet the criteria at 24.103. To be cognizant of the Uniform Act regulations in appraising the sites pursuant to which states that appraisers shall disregard any increase or increase value caused by the project. So also reference Appendix A of the regulations. Have a review appraisal performed. But like I said, the city, and Tom, there's no negotiations, Reimburse the seller for all reasonable costs and required closing costs. Well, you'll see where they charge me for the closing costs. Provide copies of correspondence with all 11 owners, final appraisals, review appraisals, and proof of payment to sellers for acquisition, closing costs, and the difference provided to sellers who are already showing full market value was paid for the property. So they had to come back and do all these buildings again and actually get appraisals on them. And then the people got the appraisals on them. Because, like I said from the beginning, that's all I ever asked for. If corrective action is not taken, HUD may disallow all costs associated with these acquisitions under a disaster grant or CBD funds supplemented for this effort. Like I said, HUD didn't care. Concern. It's a concern that the state did not seek proper advice or receive correct information from the grant funding source, HUD, to ensure that it was providing the correct information to the city of Beaver Dam. While we understand the desire and need to keep limited grant funding available and cost low, it shall not be at the expense of the property owners and the tenants displaced. The state has an acquisition relocation expert, but for an undetermined reason, the state did not follow the direction and advice of Jack Sanderson. He told them they had to do it. Well, they did it, they got the money, and then it appears they gave it to somebody worth $200 million. So they ruined these people's lives. We understand that when the project was transferred from the Department of Commerce to the Department of Administration, there was confusion about the need to provide relocation. But it's our hope that the state will either reach out to HUD or for HUD-assisted project on direction and advice, will consider the state's own appropriately informed and educated staff opinions in making decisions to apply or not apply the acquisition or relocation rules anytime you receive federal funding, okay? That's most of what they have. They have to do it. That's the law. The state did not follow correct staff advice. It appears the state received legal opinions from unaware staff and other agency counsel to make the determination that the Uniform Act was not applicable. Well, I guess that's when you have the DNR's attorney take care of it, with the Commerce Department, so the city doesn't have to do it. That would be something like that, right? In fact, the state is being required to retroactively provide correct payment and services to those owners who sold for the project and one remaining seller who is not, Mr. Hay, me. The overall effect is a lack of goodwill and true And then this is the most important: timely compensation for sellers' losses. So they're supposed to pay us for our losses. But the Department of Administration, I talked to them, and I said, if you prove they interfered with your business, they have to pay you that $50,000 replacement, which they wrote down from my building. And, oh, no, we've never done that before. It's like, I don't know if you've ever threatened, your state has ever threatened anybody, because the DNR is part of the state. Recommended action. HUD recommends that state develop procedures to handle situations where there may be question about the applicability of complex regulation like the Uniform Act. It is also recommended the state use its educated internal staff resources to the fullest extent possible to avoid future issues of not complying with the law and regulations. Commerce knew what they were doing. Yeah. Relocation applicability and benefits under the Uniform Relocation Act, X 49 CFR 24. Purpose. The purpose of this review was specific to the Beaver Dam disaster grant and primarily resulted from a complaint received from one property owner. After reviewing the complaint, we asked the state for documentation and explanation to process to determine if we need to perform a formal monitoring of this project. We determined that there were issues that needed to be addressed in a formal manner with required resolutions. Findings. One finding was identified in the review of relocation activity. No concerns were identified in relation to relocation activity. Due to the nature of the acquisitions performed for this project, should he have been directed to inform all occupants of their potential eligibility for protections under the Uniform Act and other relocation program assistance, including the payments to business owners and tenants. In reviewing the file documentation and other material gathered from all sources, we have determined there was a relocation plan created. Yeah. Paid for with disaster grant fund dollars on March 11, 2009 by SRF Consulting, amended December 8, 2010. Approved by the State Department of Commerce plan. The plan was never implemented. The plan shows specific occupancy, benefit levels, anticipated process, and more. If the plan is implemented, it would have fulfilled most, if not all, HUD requirements. Well, they used that to get the grant. They got the money. I mean, they were supposed to distribute it according to their plan within 30 days, and they didn't. They broke the law. The money, when you get a grant like that, the money is supposed to be used for its intended use, and it wasn't. We are unable to determine why the relocation as written for this project was not implemented. Well, they're being very careful not to talk about the Wyco property, like I was telling you. They keep that out of there, and I sent that to them, to HUD. They're being very careful. We believe it is related to receiving poor advice and applicability of the Uniform Act. The city nor the state provided the correct guidance or level of assistance required to provide relocation services payments according to the regulations. The overall effect is that owners, tenants, businesses who own or rented properties in question were not afforded correct benefit. The result is that instead of improving the quality of life for the property owners' tenants, the opposite was evident and no relocation assistance was provided. Now, they got the money. I mean, and that's what's really sad about it, because they could have made people's lives a lot better, and they ruined these people in the process with this. The state shall require implementation of the relocation plan created and approved for this project. We expect the state to provide sufficient oversight and management of this effort. That's page 7. There's a lot here, but that's all I want to say this for one episode. State or its legal agent shall contact by search or trace efforts if needed all previous occupants for the following parcels: 105, 109, 203, 205, 145, 149, 207, 209, 211, 151, 155, 201 Front Street. There was a mix of residential and commercial, as well as a mix of owners and tenants. Once previous occupants are found and contacted, they should be provided the following: notice of eligibility explaining to occupants they were eligible for protections under the Uniform Act, specifically stating services and amounts they would likely be eligible for. advisory service to help displaced persons and business in filling their relocation claims and benefits. Well, some of the places never even stopped. They did it in a week because it takes 3, and they wrote down anything. So the whole thing is a fraud, and they didn't distribute it. So, offering of required benefits for owner and tenant's business for moving and reestablished payments. Replacement housing payments. Pursuant to Wisconsin, the benefit under state laws provide 48 months of rental gap or gap assistance to tenants. The Uniform Act, 42 months, but the state must comply with its own ceilings, caps, and benefits levels if higher than in addition to federal rules. Well, I'm going to show you, I got actually the sheet that everybody got for this. And none of the tenants got any money. So if you lived in one of those buildings, okay, as a tenant, I think you should go down to City Hall and talk to the city attorney and say, hey, where's my money, okay? Because they're supposed to pay it out in here. But, you'll see the way they acted with the relocation. When residential occupants are contacted, they should be provided with the opportunity to relocation to decent, safe, and sanitary housing. If the state finds that these displaced did not secure adequate code complement housing as replacement for the unit they were displaced from, if the occupants did apply code complaint housing after displacement, the relocation gap payment should be used on the unit until actually occupied after displacement. Documentation. Provide actual claim forms, proof of payments, and copies of all correspondence with displaced persons to HUD when completed. They didn't get a hold of any of those people or the tenants. And then residential displacement in presidentially declared disaster area. That's what this was. Notwithstanding any other provision of the law, no person otherwise eligible for any kind of replacement housing under the Uniform Act shall be denied such eligibility as a result of being unable to occupy as a result of a clear disaster by the President of the United States. There's a lot to this, but like I said, the Chicago field office really didn't want to do this, but I thank Sean Donovan again. Okay, this is another page here. This is page 9. By virtue of Section 414, replacement housing assistance shall be provided to otherwise eligible residents without regard to their inability to meet the occupancy or length and occupancy standards. There was no evidence that the above part of the staff regard was waived by the state of Wisconsin in relation to these funds. Other waivers were documented, but not this specific provision. This means that any residential occupant on site prior to the flood needs to be contacted and provided benefit. All those who reoccupied or even occupied as a new tenant after the flood are eligible for benefits. State of Wisconsin Administration Monitoring Management of HUD-funded projects. The purpose of this review was to determine the program's participants' overall management of the acquisition and displacement under the Disaster Assistance Program. Section 105, the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, as amended as implemented at 24 CFR Part 570, emphasis was placed on reviewing specific management, oversight, and record-keeping benefits to those displaced in Beaver Dam. We reviewed the following: a copy of the state's written acquisition and relocation policies and procedures, a copy of the state's residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance policy, application received by the state for project assistance in Beaver Dam and any subsequent amendments to the project scope or approved activities, the grant approval and grant agreement for the project with any attachments, a copy of the formal disaster assistance declarations applied to this project, a copy of any waivers requested and approved by HUD in relocation in relation to this disaster recovery grant. We reviewed the written policies and procedures set forth by the state as chapter administration, relocation assistance, acquisition and relocation chapter, implementation handbook, Wisconsin relocation rights brochure for business, farm, and nonprofit organizations. Those are kind of like what they're supposed to go by. So they have rules. Okay, this is page 10. We got a few more of these left, and that'll be it. But the purpose of asking, I'll show you that one again. I didn't do it. That's S10. The purpose of asking for the state's policies and procedures is to review and comment as whether they met HUD regulations of the Uniform Act. of the Housing and Community Development Act as amended. Overall, the written materials that the state uses to manage this function are very good. In reviewing what was provided as a part of this effort, we have concern that the material does not address some HUD requirements because federal law supersedes. We did not receive a homeowner or residential tenant brochure before detailing rights, process, benefits potentially displaced person. The state has a residential tenant homeowner brochure. Please provide for review. Specifically, the following is not discussed or incorrectly applied. Okay. And there is no discussion on relocation plans under Section 104, which is based solely on the difference between 30% of income and a comparable. Wow. So you're supposed to get 30% above it. The gap payments for 5 years, not as the forest state. So everybody should have got another 30% for their building. But state doesn't care. There is mention of displaced persons waiving rights under the state's program. HUD and the Uniform Act prohibit a government or its project partners from proposing that sellers or displaced persons waive their rights. There are some nuances to this which can be discussed with our staff. The state should make correction to add to its policies and procedures on the application of the Uniform Act. It appears the state may be unaware of the role income plays in displacement housing under the Act. So the income and stuff like that would raise your value the way it sounds. State not be applying income into his calculation as a result. Maybe, no, that's kind of what I read. We recommend that state's relocation staff persons or persons work with this office to advise written policies. Conclusion. As stated in this cover letter, please respond to this monitoring letter within 45 of the state. During the 45-day period, we asked to have Mr. Hafe contacted immediately and a valid purchase offer and relocation benefit to be provided. Okay. It took them 6 months. After 5 months, I called them up. And, they were supposed to be done in 45 days. That's what you do when you bought a house or something. Probably 45 days, a reasonable time period. Not 6 months. They just wanted to bleed me more. And that's why I had to beg the city for my appraisal, even though they weren't supposed to do it. Also, during this 45-day period, we require a reasonable time frame and steps to be taken to go back and trace occupants, compensate sellers and others as needed. We will consider an additional 45 days to fully implement the relocation plan, provide relocation benefits, and pay sellers the amounts due. Thank you for your continued cooperation, please. So, they took their time. They didn't care. This here is a sheet. That was basically the end of that report. So this is their sheet they gave for a timetable. Beaver Dam property acquisitions, HUD required corrections action project work complete. So meet with city officials, meet with DOT officials, contact Jay Hape, letter through Hape attorney, update letter to Maureen Thurman, future updates to Maureen Thurman, develop appraisal relocation scope work, contact contractor and request price quote. So they should have probably had a contractor come and see how much my place is worth. That's what that sounds like. Complete Hape property appraisal, review appraisal, Hape property relocation benefit, develop offer to Mr. Hape, submit offer to Mr. Hape through the city, complete the property, and then acquisition payments corrections, identify and locate former property owners, conduct appraisals of property to determine pre-flood values. So they had to go back and give everybody appraisals because they didn't, because of blackmail. Review appraisals, determine amount of restitution based on the established fair market price and price paid based on assessed value. And then separately it says make restitution payments because everybody had losses, everybody, yeah. Relocations, corrections, identify and locate former property owners, identify and locate former commercial tenants, identify and locate former residential tenants, which you'll see that they didn't do any of that. Review relocation plan for current relevancy. Determine appropriate relocation benefits to property owners, commercial tenants, and residual tenants. And that's one of the biggest problems I have with this. If this would have done, they broke the law. Okay, they got the money, gave it away, spent it, whatever. They got the money. Okay, it's their fault. that all these people, including me especially, lost all this money. And then it's determine gap rental payments for former residential tenants, inspect residential replacement dwellings, and then make restitution payments. So this is Beaver Dam acquisition relocation compensation project. This is where they gave them another $1 million. So that's be the 4th time the city received funding for my building. 3 times triplicate funding of disaster funding. The third of those, and the 4th was a TIF. It was in there, but it's still considered funding. Okay, so we're gonna go to draw to 1. That was me. They gave me $183,000 for my building. I got an appraisal, and they didn't want to do a review appraisal. They waited for 6 months, and what I did was I was so sick of the whole thing, and my, you wouldn't believe what it cost me to have my lawyer do this, because at $400 an hour, and they just kept dragging it on, and he calling them up, talking to them about relocation. So that's what I got, $183,000, and then they took out for the title fees, recording fees, property tax, utility bill was $13, but they were supposed to pay the closing costs. They made me pay that. And just a note on my property tax, it was $1,687 every 6 months. And so it was like $3,300 a year in property taxes, for a vacant building. Because what they did was, when the DNR did their appraisal like 3 years before that, they raised it, my taxes. Yeah, that's nice of them. Yeah. But what I did is, I got after they took everything out of there, it was $175,964. But I spent $40,000 to fix my building, $40,000 to fix the outside of the building, so that's $80,000. I spent $50,000 on lawyers approximately to defend myself against, because they broke these laws. And then I had to pay $20,000 in capital gains, and just, so almost the whole money I got from my building went for part of my losses. But my building sat vacant for 5.5 years. I was making $75,000 a year before taxes. So I lost a fortune of money, and it's not my fault, because they broke the law, and so they were going to move on to Larry Lang. They had to go back and reappraise his property, and that was the guy that was on the video I had on there. They said that they gave him, but he didn't know that he was required to get an appraisal. But they gave him I got him $43,207, Larry Lang. Schurret, Schurret, I got him $51,500. And Vicki Williams, I got her $48,140. And then what they did was they paid me relocation basically for my moving expenses. That was it. There was another $60,000 that they had in a plan. But they told them in here that they were supposed to use the plan. They're supposed to use what they had because they got the money. But they ended up giving them an extra $1 million, But they gave me $20,000 in moving costs. I moved 6 times because I moved after the flood. Then I moved. Then after First House building was going to collapse, so I moved everything out immediately. Then I moved back, and then I moved back and forth 2 other times. So it was like 6 times that I moved. So then for Schurret and Plummer, it says here they got $20,000 for Schurret for relocation, and then Plummer got $15,090.96, and then relocation for Vicki Williams, they gave her $9,185. Even after she moved, if she would have got that money right away, her whole life would have been different, because she got $48,000 for a building. 6 years later, she got a relocation. 6 years later, I mean, they would have paid these people the money that they had, and they actually wrote down over $65,000 for her building. Where'd the money go? Plus they're giving them more money. We'll give you more. The property purchase for Fairchild, he cashed in big time. You know, he got $12,853 because of me. For Absolute Home, he got $20,000 in relocation. For Absolute Title, he got $7,483. For Absolute Financial, he got another $20,000 in relocation. Absolute Inventions, he got $1,000 for that. And then the property purchase for Renzani, they got $40,043 extra because of me. Larry Lane got relocation of $2,221. And then Ron Fultz, who owned 3 of the buildings, he got $110,051 because of me. But what's kind of interesting is to have down here property taxes for 2003 Front Street, $1,672.90. You know, how can you write down property tax for my building when I paid them? When you sell property, you're always a year behind because that's the way it works. When you buy a property, you don't pay it. After you're there a year, you pay taxes. So I think that they owe the state that money back, $1,672.90. And then relocation for Game On, they got $12,397. And now they got property taxes for 203 Front Street again, $1,671. And then Ronzani got $9,427 for relocation. And then Call got $13,440. I've only had one of these people that I got all this money say thank you, but a lot of them didn't know, because I put this in the paper. I sent a copy of this 13-page report to the city paper, and I sent it to the radio. The radio went on there and it said that the city, they put on there the city was acting in good faith. That's the only thing they put on there. You know what I mean? So it, you know, never take a chance, you know, to make Jay look bad or whatever, you know, because I believe the paper and there's one thing I was thinking too, is, you know, they might have went back and changed it in the state of Wisconsin. But the big thing is, when she did this report, she had the 3.7 million that they got. And it just says Wisconsin, one of 11 states, sharing a total of $3.7 million in federal aid to help recover from last year's flood. 3.7 billion. Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan says the money will help rebuild infrastructure, restore housing, revitalize communities. Donovan approved the grants yesterday in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which suffered the heaviest flooding in the Midwest. Donovan told local leaders that no community or state should ever have to go through such a tragedy alone again. Iowa expects $500 million in federal aid, but they won't receive it until next week. In Wisconsin, the governor announced $39 million in flood relief on Tuesday through the community block grants. It was announced Tuesday night that Beaver Dam would get $3.7 million, which cover the costs of demolition. That's just another one that reassures, you know, that fact. So the problem with this is OR Colon. They're the ones that came in and did this relocation, you know, and, you know, they're getting paid they're like professionals. They're from Missouri, you know, and why would you bring somebody? They're HUD's people, because they come in, they're cooler. They come in and they do things as cheap as possible. You know, they wouldn't meet with me. And it says, I'm receiving your letter May 2nd, discuss the contents with the personnel from the state of Wisconsin. They informed me that City of Beaver Dam should be mailing an offer of letter to you for the next several days. I look forward to discussing the offer with you amicably resolving this matter. The city wasn't supposed to do the appraisal. As to the relocation plan and other issues mentioned in your letter, there's no relocation plan, no new relocation plan. The HUD review asked the state to implement the 2009 plan, but they didn't. You know, they wanted to cheat everybody. I don't know if they got a bonus for, you know, not meeting with people and doing it right. The offer letter you will receive from the city will begin that process. Relocation has many options. I think that once you get in discussion of these options, we can tailor the best approach for your clients. They were supposed to use the one. I showed you that, but they didn't. They received the money. I mean, did they really need another $1 million? That's why I have such a problem with HUD. They give them a free ride. You know, it's amazing. Okay. And this is about the restitution payments in there. And that make restitution payments. Restitution is defined as the basic purpose of restitution is to achieve fairness and present the unjust enrichment of a party, like getting money and not distributing it to, In criminal law, restitution is a regular feature in the sentencing of criminal defendants. Courts try to fashion restitution of a criminal defendant according to the crime committed. In tort law, restitution applies to the measure of damages required to restore the plaintiff to the position he or she had prior to all these crimes. In the federal report, it clearly states property owners should be compensated for the losses, not break the law again. They're responsible for all my losses and costs, every penny, and they owe me for 4.5 years. They ruined my life. Many of the property owners were ruined and now only pay them for their reestablishment costs. You know, it just it's insane. This is my losses. This is something I wrote. My losses are unimaginable. The City of Commerce Department, Wisconsin DNR, and other state officials are 100% responsible. I got caught in the middle of a huge wheel conspiracy with the city and DNR's blackmail of the other 10 property owners. It was virtually impossible for me to be treated fairly and legally because the city had the property owners sign an addendum stating that no property would be treated legally. So the only way to treat me legally for my property was to go back and treat everyone legally, which eventually happened because of this report. And losses is another story. No one has ever paid for their losses. Many of the business owners walked away like me because of the fraudulent statements from the city and the DNR on the 50% rule and then telling us we couldn't fix our buildings. You tell me, if you were Jay Hafe, would you want to run a business in this town as corrupted as it is? When they did everything to ruin me completely. Not only was my business destroyed, but my life and reputation. Beaver Dam's Mayor Tom Kennedy is an expert liar with no respect to the citizens of his own town and with the goal to destroy the citizens' lives. There is no way I could have relocated without a loss of my business, and then the 4th time and possibly 5 times receiving funding for my property. Couldn't go back and treat the people legally when they had the chance. There says no negotiations. The city and state showed no remorse for their atrocities, never admitting or saying they were sorry, and going back and not following the Uniform Relocation Act. HUD, instead of recognizing all these civil rights violations and corruption, they chose to cover it all up and give criminals blessing and allow more funding. People that go to work every day, join the military, and pay taxes deserve better, not this. By HUD not caring about the laws and the corruption by giving a small slap on the head, it has only emboldened the state of Wisconsin, which you'll see in the next chapter. My loss is due to the constant and total defamation of my character. It's impossible for me to get a job locally. No employer would have given me an interview. I applied 12 times in multiple jobs. Nobody wanted to touch me. They felt it was me and not the city because of the city's constant manipulation of the media. When the city received funding under the Stafford Act, they could have helped at least 30 families and a lot more, but had no desire to ever help their citizens. Flood recovery money is for helping people in your community, but they had other motives, like not only helping anyway, but to ruin them financial gain for illegal development. Beaver Dam and the state of Wisconsin are clearly a corrupt criminal enterprise, not part of a democracy. I really don't know how they can fly an American flag over there. And like I said, you know, that was a sheet on there. The tenants didn't get anything. They didn't want to waste their time with, you know, trying to find these tenants, even though they're getting paid for it. So, like I said, if you're a tenant, you didn't get any money, you know, and, you know, if you want to help, you know, please, you know, call FEMA about this. I mean, this is, it's insane. The whole thing. It's just a huge conspiracy, you know, and I had no idea the government was this corrupt. I really did not, you know, and, you know, if they could come in and take a look at not just the Commerce Department, the Department of Administration, you know, I guess they want all the money to give it to rich people. All right, we love you folks. Thank you for putting up with me. That's episode 20, and I hope the best for everybody.